No. Okay, what? Okay, what?
So I was thinking of how to make connection to NUS parts in the drone parts. And I think the connection could be development of the industry type. Yeah. If we track there's a timeline of Singapore getting industrialized and established. I think it should be, yeah. And following this timeline of primary, secondary, tertiary, you can see that the NUS subsidiaries evolving within the context. So that's at 60.
Is this mostly done by you?
Oh, this is by Sam.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're gonna do more investigation on 4 years.
Okay, hey, but only when they have those reports, right? I think you feel them piece together. But 60s, there's quite a lot of information there.
But we have reports for everything.
Oh, okay. So did they make a case for why? Sorry, I didn't actually ask. But did they make? I kind of assume that that's where they stayed. Why these changes were significant. You know how every research or every story, we're not insurance, but every time you make a claim, there's always like, wow, this is the like 68, right? If say to any European, May 68, wow, that's like a year when there was a riot and people felt empowered. There was when this imagination of society shift. Something like a big kind of significance of the year. Anyway, but that's something you can sort of say, oh, this is a pivot. Yes, important. Okay. Yeah, actually, now to just go straight into what you want to do. This is just super interesting. So you're sticking with looking at Jurong as a planning entity to see how it evolved and also how it supports something like NUS, right? Yes. So you can let them do NUS. So how do you involve them with NUS? You mostly let them run. Okay, they're quite independent, they run a bit, and then you meet them halfway and you say, okay, this is where NUS met. You met wrong. NUS was so foundational. Yeah. In Jurong, yes, but then later Jurong became itself. Yes, it became its own powerhouse. groups and produce its own headquarters. So it's Jurong has concepts of industrial planning, township making, industrial. So in fact, it can produce its own city with or without HDB. Yes, that's the truth. But they now collaborated with Savannah and Jurong Savannah. So if you read their current history, if you go to Jurong Savannah, they mentioned a bit about their past, right? Jurong Savannah, yeah. SURBA. Jurong Savannah is the newest entity formed about number 5. So a lot of my classmates will be like directors at Jurong Savannah because they're forming studio groups to Costco and jobs, travel China. That's quite. And Jurong Savannah will end up buying things like even SAA. Yes, SAA is a local company. SAA had at least a few hundred architects. Because they want to buy their. They want to buy them. Yes, very, very. Okay. Back to where you are. How would you want to represent it? Are they going the timeline so that you can sit on top of them?
I think the major point has to be the demand for industry education, and this flow has to come in the middle, and this will having this timeline here. Develop a Jurong, develop a steel, and
so you will agree with them, pre-agree with them that there's a line with him.
right? Yes.
Okay, then you can be more. Okay.
So I'm thinking of if I am possible to follow the subsidiary changes of next steel. I can pretty much see what type of industry they are focusing on.
Yeah.
So far they are moving on to environmental stuff such as dealing with the oil waste and electricity, tech, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So having that
Electricity, dealing with oil
waste.
and electricity. But they go into environmental cleaning, right?
Yes.
Environmental sector together with Sambawang. What was it? There were groups that were mentioned. Samcorp. Samcorp is Sam is Sambawang, which is the northern district in Singapore. So Samcorp, Sambawang Corps. And you will see that there's a new sector, environmental waste. There's one sector in e-waste. One sector in net steel that they were they belong to net steel or they were cooperating or they're competitors?
The Stamcorp.
Yeah. I remember it was discussed 2 weeks ago. You guys.
It was brought up because it was the governmental corporate from the beginning of 1960.
Right.
With Nestle.
Okay. It was like a subsidiary or some kind of.
It was a
link.
There were like 5 or 6 companies that were launched by the government.
Right. Okay. So there's a family, like a kind of sibling of companies
From the
beginning, and then we're tracking next week. Were there any links between those?
Yeah. I don't really sure.
Okay, let them discuss. Okay, so back to this line where you meet them. The one thing is to ask that group where they are at when it comes to representing their ideas.
I was thinking
you can steer it out. So, I think this one is right.
I think suggesting you incorporate into more events still for next years, because different type of industry demands different type of physical occupancy. That still was located on the coast because it has to be trading with other countries and
probably have seawater access.
Yes.
Cooling.
Yes. So that was the physical reason for NUS still locating in this area. But now, if we were to say that the type of industry is moving more onto the tech-based AI, that kind of stuff, I don't really have details yet. But if we were to say we're moving on to
You do.
then
As a GIE Innovation District, yeah, Jurong Lake Gardens. So Jurong Lake Gardens is for the CBD, mostly offices, but mostly tech offices. So it's a CBD that's going to be differentiated. Like this CBD is finance, banking.
Yeah.
This CBD, yeah, the old one, the old one downtown here. The called the gold. No, actually, yeah, here. The golden shoe is a finance CBD. This is going to be the tax right here, quite obvious. Yeah. Therefore it's linked to NTU, it's linked to
yes,
linked to transportation. So even Southeast Asian countries coming can have very efficient things. So to speak. But that seems to be a commuter rail, yeah, as opposed to the high speed rail, as opposed to logistic rail. That means I don't know whether it's whether that makes a big difference, because and also these days the link to the port. Let's say they develop chips and they start to manufacture stuff, and I think they will hit the port readily as they will hit the rail. Rail logistics is not as sophisticated as in terms of no, in terms of distributing manufactured products. Yes, right. I think we still see container ships. So ground transportation is not as big, and not as fuel efficient as well. Yeah, I don't know whether that's part of the equation, but that's just something that. So this is a again. I was what it is has a bit of it gives a strong clue as to where they are, where they're being influential. Yes, Jurong as a planning entity, and I think at first I thought, remember I corrected myself. I said, oh, I don't think the Singapore map. So but then you say no, hang on. I have mapped all the locations where they have inserted themselves as under their jurisdiction, under their control. So then I said yes, then it is significant. At least this is the geography part, right? The geographical relevance. So every we talk about territory, we talk about capital, labor, we talk about policy, we talk about history. So these are all layers that can come in. Right? So where do you think you would allow, let's say let's start from there first. Just to give yourself the thing. What's the best way to do it? So you've got a job for data and you also have this historical record. How is this going to merge this? So, like I said to every group, I will allow you to come in with your own persuasion and presentation. You can show this separately, you can show this separately, right? You can show timelines separately or operating diagrams, hierarchy diagrams separately. But later on, I want them to sort of come together so that they cross-pollinate, impact each other, see new relationships, and hopefully, yes, like that itself is a design process, and later can be even more interesting when it became the complex client that I think Jurong's my client. I'm going to anticipate they were going to go into this area, they will need that kind of program, and I'm the one designing. Cycling, the professor cycling. So when it comes together, so for you, your choice is okay. Is this timeline my main organism? Because you look at the spectrum, right? Or now this is the main organism. I'm going to stack things up. energize it, make it add information. Like how do I think of understanding the historical layer on a geographical layer? And the becomes a graphic design question becomes now you have two data points, right? Yeah, say you go like, okay, how about right? The worst would be okay, side by side. Like this one, whatever. So, okay, that's the low end design outcome. But what else can it be? Then later on, you can say, look, within this, there are key monuments that came to represent. Then towards the end of this conversation, when not yesterday, yes, 2 days ago, when we saw this, I asked the question, what about the extraterritorial properties or land that they are planning? So like Suzhou, probably Suzhou, maybe this size, Suzhou Industrial Park. Then what if I really show them to scale and then start to show a kind of map of Suzhou clan townships that will start to suddenly make Singapore look small, because that has you have shown that from a certain period, maybe 1980s and 90s onwards, this state capitalist mode. Remember I used that word when consultancies in Singapore have sort of peaked, and decided, okay, I'm going to sell my ideas as a consultant to other governments. So Suzhou Singapore Industrial Park was a G2G enterprise, that means government to government. So they have very, very specialized a lot of green channels that are available only to the participants of this group. As Suzhou, SUCHOU, Suzhou dash hyphen Singapore Industrial Park. Sometimes it's known as SIP. The S became like one SIP Industrial Park. So then I've also taken students to visit Vietnam Singapore Industrial Park. This is VSIP. There are.
So it's located in Singapore.
No, it's in Vietnam. It's in Ho Chi Minh City, on the outskirts of Ho Chi Minh City.
And this is in China.
This is in Suzhou. Is 1 hour outside Shanghai. Yeah. Suzhou is the next door city. It's an ancient city next to Shanghai. It's much older than Shanghai. It's 500 years of high civilization culture. So that Suzhou for its gardens, because they're so advanced in terms of their cultural and technological thinking. These are the very wealthy class that make gardens to enjoy themselves. And it became an art form, and so everyone in landscape will study these man-made gardens as an art form. And they're 500-600 years old, 500 years old. Yeah. And these are, I'm not sure these are the only ones, but these are the success stories that we'll talk about a lot. So, yeah, sure. It's for you to find out what their role is, because when it's now seen as a government project, so there are agencies involved in it. Jurong could be a lead agency because it's industrial planning. So they would design all the things like special nitrogen pipes all around the city in this section where it's industries that need to tap into certain kinds of chemicals. Or you have special waste collection where you're producing some high toxic waste and we will collect them for you. So it's the networks within that is train plan, workers, housing. This is how you deliver them. Schools, okay, that's where your kids will go to school. Parks, this is where you go shopping, you go to recreation. And even down to social welfare. Oh, this is your savings account. So they would say when you make your living there in Suzhou, So SIP has its own CPF system. Have you heard of the Singapore CPF? It's like a mandatory savings. So if the government doesn't want to do welfare, government says, I will take care of you, but you take care of yourself. So you make a salary $2,000, I'll take 70% back. Right? Every country has some social security system. US has it. US is not a personalized account. I don't know about Korea, but US would be just dump it to the federal and then they collect it and then they say, oh, we're holding it for you, and then when you retire, I'll give you this much back. But their number is changing. But in Singapore, it's a personal account. You contribute this much, Singapore government will give you this interest rate, and you keep it in there. So basically, it's become a bit like a bank. And there's a lot of internal debate among Singaporeans that why are you holding on? But they're saying this is the reserve, and we're looking out for you. As a citizen, you can tap into this money. It's all yours. We'll give it back to you when you retire. Yeah. So SIP has built in that special provision. Yeah. Of a very high social security, and real estate prices in SIP are higher than Marina City because it just happened to have the single branding, very top end MNC, multinational corporations like Bosch, I suppose Samsung will be in there, all the high tech companies are on that. They solicited them when they were doing that. Say, would you come with top graduates? We have good engineers, we have good lifestyle, we have nice big parks. So there's also a link in that. So that's the idea, right? That it's almost like a template of this. Yeah. So they want to replicate it. So that's the part that's like a kind of extraterritorial, right? They found a part and it's like they're following the plan a little bit. You could make that argument. Yeah. So that's where there's a little bit of that systems thinking already. Like this whole thing is a whole multi-agency bid and stamp out. The old days, I don't think ever when the gardens were there, they were just said to counteract the harshness of industrial living, and therefore let's give them Europe Park and why Japanese said that already. They were attracting Japanese investors. And where are the other executive housing? Very nice, high-end, where the good schools around the west side. So those are all part of the makeup, isn't it? What an industrial township is. And that's what you're chasing. So you can go more in depth. So if this is the center, you have to ask yourself, and maybe by the end of 10 15 minutes, there's at least say 2 or 3 ways of trying this idea when they come together. Connecting separate information, you have no problem. If that comes out, this one, right? And if I say, okay, look, give me the housing layer, you can collect it, right? You can see where the housing is. And those led by JTC. If I say where the parts, you can also get it. I mean, so and imagine if you trace those, and now you have extraterritorial on the other side. You have second, third, multi land use for the fifth, icons, 26. How do they come together? Is it, and what's the thesis? Like, what's the main message? The message is some kind of total environment control. Like I'm giving you an industrial town, but hey, I'm also giving you total living, total modern living, clean living, not dirty, not messy. Is that one of the underlying message in the way even that still might fit their agendas on fuels?
So from this mapping, we've seen that industrial spatial occupancy has led the physical location of the industries. Yeah. And then because of the physical locations, the resident and the park was determined. Yeah. This is the resident. Yellow one's the residential. Okay. Good. So good. Serving the industrial park.
And maybe housing you have to differentiate workers versus executive. Like where the high level, how do you Singapore attract top level Japanese execs to come here to work there? So they're gonna give up their familiar, Tokyo, Osaka house and to come here to this La La Land with no amenities, which is I'm sure it's difficult. So right, industrial postings, yeah, sometimes can be a hardship. posting. That means that make you come up with action. Yeah. Like maybe a hardship posting. Like if you go to the outskirts of Seoul, you say, look, I'm going to send you to industrial town. Well, sometimes you got honestly. So I have my kids, a good school, and so to come to this part, imagine 1960s where it's kind of like empty. Yeah. Like, who wants to come? So they said to the Japanese, okay, give you a park. So just try and imagine what it means to them. So executive housing might be planned very differently from workers' housing.
Executive housing.
Yeah,
Executive housing.
yeah, yeah. That means high level luxury housing. Where do they live? Maybe they don't live there. Maybe they're. JTC actually owns a lot of properties. They're very hard. I don't know whether it's possible to find them. Yeah, but hey, do you guys Singaporeans? Maybe only Matthew left. Do you know Chimpi? Chimpi. Yeah. Holland Village, right? Quite a nice swanky part, right? Their houses at the back. Yeah. Are they JTC owned? SLA owned? I think some of them are JTC owned, Yeah. But how do you find them? How do you find which agency owns what? So you have some nice bungalows and sometimes SLA own them if it's centralized back to Singapore land. But I know Jurong owns some housing all around town. Sometimes it's because it used to sit on industrial land, but other times they're not Jurong owned, right? It's SLA. Oh. So it's all declared somewhere. Or, okay. With JTC website, because you guys are also interested in JTC, he's going in depth to Jurong as a planning entity. Do you think there's sources? Yeah, GTC housing. And also, I'm trying to differentiate like executive housing versus workers' housing, because GTC do take care of some of the high level execs, and unless they just let them go out to the market and rent anything they want and just pay them, right? That's also possible. Okay, One North has some fancy housing.
JTC housing.
Is it like, yeah, all on the west? Okay. See, the minute you differentiate two types of housing, just on paper, you immediately alert your leaders to, they also have high level to cater to the managers, the senior staff. Okay, that's for me. That's important in the sense that you have a fine grain understanding. So okay, let's talk a little bit about Matthew and Daniel were at a stage where they were trying to picture. So you heard on Tuesday, they got this sectional thing going. Yes. Now they're thinking of sectional and part Exxon, and also they're thinking of tentacles. Still a few options. A few options. So for you, I think I already listed like at least 4 or 5 data points, and you can still add to it. When you want to, let's say, arrive at a strong thesis or whatever you call it, thesis of this topic, how would you bring them together? Right. For example, this particular accounts, right? I'm interested. For example, I'm interested to see. Let's say you're saying there's a shift towards engineering, tertiary. It's clearly to go into knowledge economy, right? So one more about policy. And what if you have to say, what is the GDP for this? And what is the GDP for this? Right? For Singapore national economy.
Oh, sure.
Then you realize land intensity, you can pick it up. Very good. Land intensity, right? Like, wow, this is very land intensive. And okay, there are different sectors here, so there's shipping. Yeah. Not sure shipping is under GTC, but maybe it's planned by GTC, but run by Apple or but you can group them under the multi-agency knowledge. JTC is sort of industry, this oil refinery industry. Then knowledge economy, also industry. Then you suddenly see that, okay, this is maybe 30, manufacturing, 30-40%, or shipping, 100%. Pharmaceutical is a one small sector inside here, but it's actually sent to the government is trying to prove to Singaporeans that they have built this with a lot of money and they are contributing to the the economy. Hey, Matthew, sorry, Singaporean. What is a bio that the pharmaceutical? Yeah, it recently reported a very high contributor to GDP, right? GDP.
Contribution to GDP.
Yeah, remember it was in the National Day speech. They didn't restated that again. Do you remember hearing a bit about it in the speech? I don't remember. Google will tell you the answer. Okay, sorry. Put you in the spot, sorry. But did it ring a bell? Like biopolis has a very big role to play, supposedly. But yeah, no, A-Star is just one big tenant in there. Yeah, making a lot of waves. But I thought there are some sectors. Okay, wait, okay, I'll leave you alone.
So what if you start to invest in, then I'm thinking, hey, what if there's a layer of physical territory, then there's another layer of money. Like, wow, actually they don't click. One is so land intensive in the 60s. Now, no, they're smarter now. They go not land intensive, but boom, like very big. Then the land intensive part they do it offshore. Yeah, they say Singapore doesn't want to do so much of it. It just wants to do strategic, like refinery, ports, and whoever can afford to stay here. I'm sure it becomes very expensive to land an industry here. And they want to do high return industries. And what are the emerging ones? Or what are the strong sectors that they build here? So there's a bit of history, but also a bit of how do they go about building it with this kind of knowledge-based industry rather than so it's a lot of R&D here as well. So industry timeline is like R&D in the front, then it goes out into, so it leaves the labs, goes into factories and test, and then turns into consumer products, then marketing, then test, and boom, they start manufacturing it. So the front end part is also industrial. It's actually where a lot more money is made. You're hiring scientists, engineers, behavioral scientists, as opposed to hiring workers. So the industry spectrum is quite big. And I think JTC sees every scale, every step of the way they are involved. Like you see, they're involved in the R&D part, they're also involved in the regulatory, actual primary industry part of like refining oil. Yeah, I'm not sure if refining oil is under primary or secondary, but surely extracting oil is primary. The first move is to, drill. That's its own set, but it's not out here. We're not doing extraction yet. It's mostly oil. So I like this actually in primary to secondary, but it may not become like that. It may not be. It's like here is where it's more of this, but the primary and the secondary is actually still running through the. Yeah, because oil refinery is still here, so it's still running through. So it's not a partition like that, but except that maybe there's more focus on this section, from this point. Yes. So you're not be wrong, but your representation must be also quite good. So back to representation. What do you think? How do you feel like you can contrast? So they tried this very provocative. I mean, I just bought them. They try a very provocative like organism. Hey, you guys don't mind me sharing? You showed this collage, and the conclusion was, and you may not actually pick that way, right? Yeah. But just for discussion, to enrich one another and cross-pollinate. They showed this collage, and I then also triggered a memory of that artist that did a very small Singapore footprint, and then became this monster, and called it Frankenstein. So everything is not to scale, but there are imagery in there that is real. That means very recognizable imagery. Like for example, suddenly you see a Jurong Town Corporation. Can't miss it, right? It's a clock tower, and then it's got this paper form that's very Paul Rudolph like. And actually, that guy, Lim Chong Keat, actually was a big fan of Paul Rudolph. Yeah, he didn't study with him directly, but he was an MIT grad. And you don't remember Chong Keat was here? Totally digressing, but you know Chong Keat was here for about 5 years ago. 4 years ago, you would have heard his lecture. 3 years ago, you could have heard his lecture. Yeah. Jeffrey, I think, introduced
the lecture. So I don't know if it doesn't ring a bell. Okay. Then that big artwork was a collage of a blob, and everything was just squeezed inside. And the message we discussed was the messaging was, this is an organism. So imagine this was an organism, and it's really ugly, like really bulky, and it's like a hawk of a monster, and it's got parts that are built in there, and it's supposed that so because they were asking me a question that maybe you are also asking. Does my imagery have to immediately send out a message, right? That your diagram has to send a message to my reader, your audience, that, oh, this is about imbalance, or this is about, on some very visual level, a diagram is not just a diagram, it is also provoking a view.
Yes.
So then you have to go back and think for yourself, what am I going to provoke? Am I going to say JTC is like a monster of an organism and is infecting everyone else, and to bring good ideas to everyone else, but it used to be this footprint, and now it's actually colonizing other footprints. So there are mini JTCs, mini Jurong now in SIP, in Suzhou, Eco City in Tianjin, Vietnam, Bisip, and so on. Did they think that their idea is so good that they transplant them? So if it's the idea of a transplantation, which also has the Frankenstein idea, it looks human, but it is very scary because the stitching is off, the person is sort of just acting a little bit strange, and the head is oversized, so it looks like a human, but so imagine the Frankenstein metaphor is used. If you use it, then your message is actually a negative one, saying watch out for the problems of if you think that JTT has all the ecosystem of a good working town, then you transplant it there. How do you find localized problems? How do you meet the conditions there on its own terms? So imagine if that is part of your messaging, then you ask yourself, graphically, how do I say that? How do I create a monster to shock people first? Then you say, okay, but hey, the things that are working here, and these are the constituencies, the parts that are helping me tell the story. I don't mean literally a human Frankenstein. It's just meaning that graphically it looks like it's going to tip over, or it's going to it's very imbalanced, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm having a hard time. Like, how do I make the connection? I'm kind of feeling the obligation of I have to make the architectural pieces.
Yes. It's supposed to evolve into the next project. So always a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So my original idea was to, okay, net steel. We're using a lot of steel, so maybe we can give net steel new corporate identity, because the name has changed a lot. So maybe we can change the name, and no more steel, maybe carbon, and there could be my intervention stuff. But if I were to neglect the net steel parts and focus on town and see as an organism how it evolved, enlarged throughout the global scale,
You will lose sight of the ground.
Yes, architectural intervention.
I actually don't think you would miss for example, let's say if just to give you one possibility, let's say you're faithful towards Jurong, which you are, by the way, you started it, and you realize that landing in a industrial area always requires the idea of livability, or the idea of that I must create very pleasant environment as a counterpart to the gritty environment. Imagine that's just your thesis. You're not married to that steel, and you're not also married to Jurong anymore. You would leave Jurong and find a site where you say, look, this is my relationship. A very intensely gritty, rough environment, heavily polluted, and I'm finding that intersection, and that's my threshold. I'm designing a hybrid where a very messy environment can be a very elegant, livable environment. And that's somewhere, really somewhere between the gardens and here. So on a macro level, you sort of know where that this is gritty land use, and this is gritty land use. So and so on. And they didn't. I'm not sure how much of M.Arch is here. Let's say if the original intent of these ministries was to say we want to create a marsh environment against the concrete jungle. This is obviously a concrete jungle. And do they try to intensify unary? It'll be interesting. Maybe you're saying, look, they did, but not enough. Yours would be such an intensely integrated kind of if you use greenery as a shorthand for the time being, you would green the hell out of this as a project, right? Or if you don't want to do an architecture project, don't take on this, right? Take on 1 or 2, 3 buildings and say, it's a very intense environment, and yet you have new policies, new visions for how the jungle will colonize it, right? And turn it to some kind of utopia. And later you also have complex questions. Maybe it becomes a dystopia, and something else happens. So the way you pull out thematics from this research is a lot freer. Yeah, that's why you don't need to worry about that still. Okay. I think in that very literal way that you have to go up against the next steel factory and say, oh, that's where I have to. Students have to deal with that exact site where they were studying. They don't have to. They Neon Concrete don't have to work on Neon City shopping mall. They don't have to deal with it. They can extract ideas, and then we'll argue about how is it using the research before, how is it helping you, so you don't start from zero, because this is supposed to be the client. So your client is still wrong, but still could be one of the proponents is wrong. You can later say my client is my office. You can say my client is one company inside my office, and yet they're all sitting on the shoulders of Jurong's planning. Right? Exactly. Okay, back to the graphics. I thought I'd leave you with at least 1 or 2 options so that you don't have to, because now you've done all the difficult work, but you're still, of course, thinking it through. But what I'm going to encourage is just go into production. Yeah, go into production. Go into a kind of planned production, and so that at least you have something very concrete by Tuesday. Yeah, which I think that's fine, because you've got the backbones. Yeah. You have about I say about 5, 6. You just add another 4. I'm trying to find it. I mean, these are all just slightly random numbers I'm throwing out, but I'm just trying to add complexity and really serve a relationship, because I wouldn't understand location until, I wouldn't appreciate this until I realize how much money is worth, for example. Yeah, so I wanted to set against GDP. But if GDP is not the right way, you find other measurements. Then you have to find kind of the relationship. Like, imagine if this was the drawing, then so I'm going to the graphics now. What if you, from this footprint, you graph out the cost or the contribution to the economy from this side? You want to show it sort of mushrooming up. Yeah, I don't know whether that's a nice graphic, but imagine, of course you've seen drawings like static scale location, then a graph bar. Then you say, oh wow, that's a skyscraper. Is that a skyscraper? No, that's the GDP. That's one way. Yeah, but not doesn't look very well designed, but you've seen it before, right? Locales, and then you want to see impact, then you do a bar graph to show. The same for have you seen sensible MIT Sensible Cities? Sense, SEN. So they're very tech-based database company. Sensible. For the SENSIB, right? Sensible, right? So they're using sensing technology. Yeah. Yeah. MIT. MIT, not city. MIT. Yeah, MIT. Yeah. MIT, so it is they were in Singapore for a while. They were attracted as a base to set up a lab here. Yeah. Then they went away after the money went out. So you know what they did? They have done things like sense they were trying to sense the heaviness of let's say mobile networks.
Yeah.
So they somehow they got the data from a telecom company. So they measured London. They said London houses this, the number of SMS sent out, for example, they measured just SMS. Today we can measure WhatsApp or whatever, right? But this is maybe more than 10 years ago. So they measure that suddenly, so they have a timeline, then they do a GIF. Boom, boom. So this London map, right? So all the locales shooting SMS, very, very stable. Then suddenly, after midnight of the New Year, then boom, there's one. Everyone started saying Happy New Year. So they're trying to visualize that. So it's visualizing data. So to very very low pulse. Then boom, Happy New Year. Then it went back to low pulse again. So the reason why they do this is to also start to predict disaster mode. That means that's why like 9/11, things like that, they will crash our mobile telecom system because everyone panicking and calling, hey, are you alive? Are you? So they're trying to they're making usable. They're using technology, but they're anticipating problems. Then they would design a better system. Yeah. So that's what they do. The MIT. So they're very effective. Ours is not. I'm just borrowing that visual graphic. So the visual graphic also needs to be animated, but yours you don't have to think about animation. They are thinking about a GIF. So I'm not sure you're still on it. You still want to do an animated, like 3-part, 4-part animated. Okay. So enrich your stuff. Okay. So I don't know whether it may not work. Yeah. So yeah, but I'm just worried that the grid is also very down. Like I mean the bar is very down. So maybe I'll ask you to okay, if you think of this, first the map, there is the location, if you make it visible. Then maybe the other top is the Singapore map. If you still want to do a Singapore map, or maybe you abstract it into something else. Let's say if it's a Singapore map, then the Singapore map has the total GDP here, and then the total GDP is drawn into the actual location specific GDP producer, something like that. Then we'll start to see. So on top, it's also like a pie chart, but it's a Singapore map pie chart. And there are different sections under representing different percentages, like okay, the biopharmaceutical section or the medical section, how much, the industrial section, how much. Then or within industry, how do they partition into manufacturing, biomed, pharmaceutical manufacturing, startup IT or consumer or electronics, or I don't know how industries are subdivided, but you can study it, and then you pull it down to locations where you think they happen, or you have research to show this is where they happen, and you start to show. I was thinking that I was trying to show disproportionality. Something is disproportionate. If that was the thesis, then this would come up kind of this such a big error might come out small. So it becomes like a little anomaly. And this one is like a mushroom. It's a small function but big big money making. So that would be in a way graphically more compelling. But it sounds like it doesn't look very good yet. So it's something to think through and design. And they are using different methods of enlarging, and some of them are running out of time to actually drawing. And so that's where you have balance what you can do based on your skill sets and what you think is visually attractive. So that's just one. And that's just a starting base, because you still have that history. How do you inject history into this? Right? How do you it's best not to see another separate chart next to this. So insert it again and make us understand this. So for their group, they're thinking, they're going to draw a rock cabin section. And I said, rock cabin section, you have to portray this. this is a section cut. You have to show that this is ground, right? So I suggested, oh, put the historical data set in the ground because they're really they're past, they're almost dead and buried. These guys are all dead, right? But they're basically the bedrock by which that whole sector set on. So that became a graphical imagination, right? Yeah. So that's also quite easy to understand because they're not. And Hyundai for them was like, oh, flying in, they're just parachuting in to do a lot of interesting projects, but they themselves have become like an organism that is very powerful. And now the bedrock is policies and the government, that's wrong. And so they got a bit of the energy, it's still up to them to design it. But that's another regime where this can go. But you don't have a section of things. So you have to think of somewhere where, again, this red design comes in.
Interline the different layers.
Yeah, the 10 data points should one. You can give yourself the freedom to show them separately during your presentation, but at the presentation, squish them all into one complex client. That's when you can see what hopefully when they're so messy coming together, you can see, oh, okay, there's a relationship there you know exists before. Of course, the worst case is always a bloody messy piece of graphic. That's the negative. But it's a
So it didn't have to be this way. It's just your intention was to show different sort of relationships in one graphic. This wasn't the case.
I should. Okay, this case was
Because I thought we have to come up with some sort of this.
yeah, you can, but the BSM is going to deform into your BSM.
Yeah.
So okay,
I see.
so okay, let's say we start with this, and I don't mind. I don't mind even if it's still a very traditional, very BSM looking BSM. Very.
I got you.
Yeah. So this can still be there. Then you want to draw Singapore here. Then you want to draw everything. So okay, that's FBS version. Okay, so he got this there. This is what you want. Environment. This is your environment, right? And FBS also has and they are acting on. So that's one level. If you show this, I would say fine. It's also totally acceptable. But I'm using this as the backbone. And I'm saying you can do anything you want as long as this idea of control and the environment, the geography, and quantity. VSM is no quantities. But I keep talking about quantities. VSM has actors. Has some actors, but the actors have no names.
Yes.
Ours now have names.
Yes.
Right? Your actors have names. HDB might be an actor.
Yeah.
Arts might be an actor. I mean, these guys are literally also actors. But they're all at different levels, different terms. So I'm so the baseline is still control. It's still who is controlling this, who funded it, who then decided that this is a good book to print money to sell it to another government. Those are all starting to end. So this one will be like Singapore. Then it's going to be more complicated than BSM because it's really a extra territorial. No, Suzhou. Maybe India also has some cities. Actually, I haven't done the research, so you can do a quick one. Maybe just within 2 hours. Like where else do we get like Brazilian governments? That one can be quite fast. Then after that, what am I tracking there? Am I tracking land use? Do they have where's the industry? Do they have schools? Do they have housing? Do they have welfare? Well, because you filter down. You filter down to all the impact flows.
Yes.
Filter back up.
Did you
decide to try? Then these become the data points. And the data points can be from can sort of cross-link. So each one of these, again, then it becomes a very three-dimensional problem. How do I'm tracking language, like you have done language there. And then later I have to track more invisible things like I want to track cost of housing, for example. Because I sort of in my narrative I said Suzhou Singapore industrial parks, private housing is easily 20 to 30% more than any housing outside in Suzhou because of this brand. Then you realize, hey, maybe we actually looked at them as close friends. Because of this collaboration, this promise of very big MNCs coming into their industrial parks. So it became like a generator of value, even though we're like, hey, we're in the industry, right? How come we're not tracking all the items? Then that discovery is, if you don't track it, you will not know because it's deeply embedded. But people who live there will know. People who live there will go like, hey, the school ranking is so high. Why? Oh, Suzhou Singapore primary school is so hard to get into. Why? Oh, because they're all pretty high level execs, families lying in there, we have a lot of, nannies and taking care of the family, so they do well, they earn a big pass down, whatever, right? So it becomes a kind of socioeconomic, new socioeconomic group there, a very specialized group. But I'm sure there are still the workers who are not in the elite schools. So, is that equal? They all get them. So there's a sub story suddenly that came out from this because you discovered it over there. And we so see how much of it you feel like and track because it's limited. But I'm just saying roughly, if you get to these data points, then you will have a lot of rich grounds for entering your project. So housing is we've already been talking about housing all day long, but we haven't tried housing prices, and it's also very ambitious. When I track housing prices, I go into agent real estate agent's website, and I see that they have also done an interesting mapping of it's almost like a swarm cloud where all the prices has a tag. If you go to some of the Chinese websites have it, Singapore websites maybe still more line items. The Chinese housing websites have started going into GIS, using geolocation to show that they have a backend coding to map it onto maps. So housing prices, location, map onto maps. So you search by clicking on a visual map. Singapore, I think, is still by name. So different, like India, I don't know. So I wouldn't have that. But, so it's starting to be even more complicated, right?
You try to follow
right?
your
I'm trying to follow.
yes.
Okay. So the reason why all this multi-sector like housing prices, school district, those are you can choose which one you want. Yeah. Maybe you just show even housing and industry is already good. Maybe because you can track X number of things, with land use, you can also track where the commercial spaces, where the recreational spaces. And we have two big, like Japanese garden and Chinese garden. It's just two obvious anchor. So you track that. Then as you go out into other areas, you can also track what else they do. So I do think that you have a very standalone project. You just need them to find a nice threshold where you can meet them and say, okay, this is if your graphic is this, then I will attach it on the line. Or you can even just say, look, I'm kind of standalone, not disadvantaged in any way. I'm clearly impacting net steel. Somewhere in here, I have a net steel component that goes out, and maybe there's a line and then links them. Right? Honestly, you also have a line to them because they're looking at exactly this issue, but they're looking at it for different reasons. They're looking at it to see where Hyundai touches. Where Hyundai touches. Yeah. So is it pretty cool in terms of geographical expansion? Of course, it sounds overwhelming.
So I think, making more relevant graphic design, more information, I don't know, give me a better opportunity for better future.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't have to be constrained in the I'll just take on and do the designing.
Yeah.
And try to see what the graphics gonna tell me.
Yeah. Let it take you where you want to. And I think you are with the devotion to this one, and again how you want to perform it and not perform it, and this land use, housing, already tried. Maybe you say, look, let's start out with too long. I want to show you how of course it will eventually support that scale. But I'm also starting to appreciate the production of housing, maybe to cars, production delivery. That's a counterpoint to empty spaces. Track this is what it looks like. Right? Yeah. Cool. All right.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Good.
That was
Nothing. It's not gonna worry. It's gonna add more energy, but not add worry.
Thank you, sir.